Hello, my name's Richard and I'm the Clinical Programmes Lead for Jenx and F. So this is the second video in a new series of videos looking at postural management through the lens of occupation. So some of the things we're looking to achieve within this new series is taking a look at why functional seating is important for participation and engagement, whether a lack of opportunity can limit or hinder a child's development, how occupational performance relates to postural management. We'll also discuss holistic and client-centred approaches to enable independence, function and engagement. We'll take a look at the ICF as well, and also the social model of disability. So this video is mainly focused around the social model of disability. So what we hope to achieve in this video is taking, first of all, a look at what the social model of disability is against the current medical model of disability that's in place. We'll look at how we can offer more opportunities for occupational engagement and performance, and how postural management can relate to that and enable independence. And then to end the video, we'll take a look at the ICF framework and the F words and how we can use them to create more opportunities. So first of all, the medical model of disability, which is current kind of practice, is very focused on the individual being the problem, the individual having an impairment, whether that's caused by neurological problems, physical problems, sensory problems. It focuses on that individual having a problem and therefore not able to engage in the way that society is currently set up. So the traditional kind of view is looking to either cure or manage or reduce the effect of an impairment so that individual is able to do the things in society that have been set up in a certain way. Whereas the social model of disability, that takes a different approach. So instead of looking at the individual as the problem, it looks more outwardly. So it looks at the barriers that are in place to that individual. So it sees the individual and looks at the societal barriers affecting them. So it acknowledges that the individual has an impairment, but looks to remove those social barriers to support them to be independent. It looks at cultural and physical environments to identify the actual barriers and problems, and it puts the responsibility back onto society rather than the individual to alleviate those barriers. So this can create a lot more stigma and attitudes, namely because of these boundaries as well, with the lack of access to community and lack of being seen can actually create this stigma. So the social model of disability was originally developed by people with impairments back in the 70s and 80s, and it was a reaction to the medical model that's currently in place. So it looked at defining the terms of disability and impairment. So impairments which are an individual's problems, which may prevent them from doing something, whereas disability being the additional disadvantage bestowed by society. So that basically means that if somebody has impairments, it's acknowledging that they have those difficulties, but with the term disability is something where it's externally been put onto that individual and reduces their ability to be independent and actually engage. So another kind of few reasons why the social model of disability was put together is to look at kind of civil rights approaches to disability, and like I mentioned, distinguishing the differences between impairments and disability, and people being unnecessarily excluded from society due to their impairments. So the Foundation for People with Learning Disabilities, they pointed out a few key ways that people are disabled by society. First of all, prejudice. So we spoke about the idea of stigma and not being seen in society, which can actually increase stigma and discrimination. The labelling of people as well, using incorrect terminology or terminology that is can be quite damning in a way, which limits people's ability to actually be independent or to achieve the things that they're capable of. There's that kind of leads on to the idea of ignorance and the lack of education and awareness of certain disabilities or certain impairments. Also, the idea that people not having the right kind of information in a format that is accessible to them. So if someone cannot absorb that information, we're actually disabling them further and disconnecting them from society. So this next slide around social justice, we went through in a little bit more detail in the previous video, so I'm not going to delve too far into kind of what this slide is saying. You can take a look at the previous video for that, but it's really just to look at that idea of equity and how not everybody starts on the same level playing field, and we need to assess them individually to find out what their needs are, to be able to help them to be as independent and help them to achieve the things that they can do in life. So how does this relate to children with complex needs? Are we offering enough opportunity for the children that we see? Is the environment set up appropriately for them? And are we disabling children further? So we're going to take a look at those questions basically and see if we can kind of delve a little bit deeper and how we might have these in our mind when we're doing our assessments of children, whether it's for equipment or for kind of a needs assessment. So first of all, the idea of stigma versus opportunity. So we spoke about the lack of accessibility and the lack of being seen in kind of the public eye. Does that actually limit someone's opportunity to engage? We looked at a study in the last video around playgrounds of how children felt very disconnected from the other children playing because they weren't able to access the same parts of that playground. So if there's a lack of opportunity to engage, how does it affect their development? Medical classification. So by labelling a child at a certain level and their GMF CS levels, 4 and 5, for example, because there's quite clear guidance around what a child can and cannot do in terms of their motor skills. Do we limit their opportunities to try to achieve certain kind of goals and milestones by labelling them as a certain level? Also within someone's diagnosis, that can also happen if we refer to a child as a hemiplegic, for example, or actually label them as their current disability. Are we setting a precedent in our own minds and in the minds of those around us of what they can and cannot do? So inclusion in mainstream schools. Obviously, certain children have different levels of needs, and it's appropriate for them to be in a different environment from a mainstream school, but is there enough inclusion within that? Correct staffing levels as well. So for children that want to engage in certain activities, is there enough staff available to help them do so? And are we promoting independence by that as well? So if there isn't enough staff to help, are we doing too much for children to effectively create learned helplessness, for example? Communication as well, and being heard and being included. If someone's not able to communicate their needs, are we doing enough to understand that and understand the child in the environment that they're in? So now we're taking a look at assessment and how we approach an assessment with the child. We have a whole webinar series around postural management and assessing a child and assessing a child's posture, and it's really focused mainly on the physical being of the child and the biomechanics, function, that sort of thing. Whereas we also need to look at the other side of the coin of what that child wants to do and what they're actually what we're managing their posture for. We don't want to just put children in chairs and standing frames so that they can sit and stand there. We want them engaging and being as active as possible. So we need to take a very child-centred approach to this. We need to understand what the child wants to do, what they need to do, what their current goals are, So it's important not to set limitations within an assessment. So obviously, like we previously discussed around children's diagnosis and the labels that they kind of hold, if we go into an assessment with those in mind and thinking, I've had X, Y, and Z children that are very similar, and we could put kind of unconscious bias onto that assessment, and not give the children the opportunities that they deserve to be able to progress and develop. We want to obviously promote as much independence as possible and see what they can do for themselves. So we want to make that assessment as occupationally focused as well. So if we are looking at an assessment for a chair, what's the chair being used for? We don't want to just set children up in chairs and standing frames to sit or stand them all day. That's not a very fun existence. If we're using the chair so that they're able to engage more in classroom activities, maybe it's painting, maybe it's drawing, maybe it's being able to communicate with peers, build that into our assessments. So we need to see if that piece of equipment is meeting those needs. So therefore we need to introduce those occupations into the assessment. And the idea with that is to promote as much independence as possible to see what the child is capable of doing themselves. So we need to also understand the needs of that child, and we also need to understand their impairments so that we're best able to approach the assessment with the correct equipment, but also the correct mentality around that assessment and in not being too limiting. And we also want to be taking a strength-based approach of seeing what the child can do for themselves prior to kind of needing intervention, which doesn't mean that the piece of equipment is going to be set up in a certain way for the entirety. We might need to think about having flexibility within that piece of equipment as well, so that we can allow that child to be as independent and to work on those goals for certain periods of time, but they may need more support and more a higher level of support and assistance during the rest of the day. So we need to take that into consideration as well. So like I mentioned in the previous video, we took a look at a study around playgrounds and the occupational injustice for children with disabilities and impairments. So what I wanted to do is just take a look at some of the key findings from that, because it can be related to a lot of different settings, a lot of different environments for children, schools and homes included. So that idea of accessibility issues, through the study we found that a lot of children weren't able to access all of the playground. In fact, some found it more embarrassing, as the children themselves found it more embarrassing, but also parents through the lack of full accessibility. So the fact that they could only access certain parts made it seem even more unusual for the rest of the children, and therefore created a bit more stigma and a bit more distance between the children. So the lack of engagement that came from going to the playground was increased. And obviously there's a lot of evidence, and it's widely known that social interactions, play, can help develop with child development in terms of their motor skills, social skills. So if they're not able to access that, they're not able to engage in those that development. There's also a lot of dependency on parents and carers for that engagement. So it also limits the ability of independence as well. So we're not able to promote that as much. So again, it's that idea of learned helplessness as well, of having that label as a disabled child. Therefore, I can't do X, Y, and Z, and I need this person to do this for me, which in certain circumstances will need assistance. But if society was set up in a different way, if the playgrounds were set up in a different way, or classroom environments, it might be that child is able to be more independent. So it's thinking a little bit more holistically and thinking a little bit more externally at what's around that child as well. So yes, the idea of missed opportunities to make friends as well. We'll come on to, in a second, the idea of the ICF and the F words, and look at friendship in a little bit more detail of why it's so important for children. And this last point here around parents tending to assume that their child didn't want to go to the playgrounds, they didn't want to return to that environment, again is us as parents and carers and clinicians thinking or making assumptions through our own interpretation of things, can also be limiting for the children that we're looking after. So having that communication and having that necessary assessment to find out what the child's needs and wants are. Just want to take an opportunity as well to point out this article in the Metro, and it is looking at how, again, children with disabilities around playgrounds and how 50% of children still can't access playgrounds. So that's on the Metro website there, if that is something you want to look into a bit further. Some of the kind of the key things that I wanted to pull out, or some of the statements that I thought were quite powerful. The playgrounds have a powerful role to play when normalising disability. The world isn't built for my son. So again, looking at the way that society is currently set up as looking at that person's child as the problem, the person with the impairment, the individual, rather than the environment not being conducive for him to engage. She's invisible in her own community, and it's a disgrace. While Emily may need assistance with some things, she's a very determined and independent young lady. She is the most giggly child you'll ever meet, and she loves feeling the wind in her hair and playing games. So it's just really to reiterate that the importance of independence and allowing a child to be as engaged independently as possible. So all of that came from a campaign being pursued by Scope, the charity Scope, and they're looking at inclusion for children with disabilities. So again, I just wanted to signpost to that campaign if, again, you wanted to get involved with that or take a look at it a little bit further as well. So now we're just going to finish off by looking at the ICF, the International Classification of Function, which was put together by the World Health Organization. This is widely used now within the realms of clinicians. So it is a more holistic view of a person. So it's not just looking at someone's disability or health condition and what they can and can't do by what their body says. It's looking at them as a bit more of a holistic person. So I'm just going to take a look at kind of the main aims of the ICF. So the ICF is a framework for organising and describing information on functioning and disability. It provides a standard language and conceptual basis for the definition and measurement of health and disability. Diagnosis alone does not predict service needs, length of hospitalisation, or level of care of functional outcomes. So this means if we use a medical classification of diagnosis alone, we may not have the information needed for health planning and management. So the ICF is a classification of health and health-related domains, those domains that can help us to describe changes in the body, in body function and structure. It identifies what a person with a health condition can do in standard environments and their level of capacity. It also is looking at what they actually do in their usual environments as well, so in home environments or environments away from a clinical setting in terms of their level of performance. So from the individual level, for an assessment, it looks at a person's level of functioning. For the kind of institutional level, which the ICF is kind of set up for clinicians, it looks at what the healthcare or other services will be needed. So it looks at what is needed in realms of services and healthcare. And from a social level, it looks at what the needs of the person with various levels of disabilities or impairments are. So their activity limitations and their participation restrictions. So it looks at the barriers of what's stopping someone. So the ICF is quite, like I mentioned, it's set up for clinicians, and it's a way of clinicians building in a more holistic approach to healthcare. However, from an outsiding point of view, it can be quite overwhelming and quite clinical sounding, as it is. So I just wanted to take a look at the F words by CanChild, a Canadian organisation, which has made it a lot more family friendly, but also paediatric focused as well. So as you can see, they have all the kind of the ICF kind of domains, but it's put into 5 different F words. So we'll just take a look at that. So in terms of environmental influences, the ICF includes environmental factors in recognition of the important role of environment in people's functioning. These factors range from physical factors such as climate, terrain or building design to social factors such as attitudes, institutions, and the laws and legislations. The ICF helps clinicians work within the constraints of the client. It helps a person adjust to the situation they're in and adapt to their environment. It focuses on what interventions a clinician can bring to increase the level of functioning for their client. It recognises that a person may have disability, but doesn't mean that they're unable to function. It focuses on function, not disability. So the ICF offers therapists more freedom to use interventions akin to the needs of the client. So as we can see, we've got the 5 different F words here. Fitness, which relates to body structure and function. Activity relates to functioning. Friends is around participation. Family is environmental factors, and fun for personal factors. So I just wanted to do a little bit more of a look at a couple of the F words. First of all, the one functioning. So this relates to activities within the ICF, like we mentioned. So it's focused on the execution of the task or action by the individual, not so much on whether they're doing or whether they're performing that task perfectly or nicely. So how functional is that? It looks at children that may want to do things in different ways, and this is important if they are able to actually action the task or not. So it really focuses on the meaningful occupations and being able to participate in that rather than focusing on how you're doing something. So functioning kind of refers also to doing, so it's more kind of activities of daily living, applying these fundamental and purposeful functions into the activity that has a meaning to the child. So, for example, walking outside to be able to play. So this can be defined as participation. The ability to execute the activities. So we're thinking of breaking these down into meaningful occupations. We need to take the end results and kind of work backwards as a top-down approach. So breaking down the activity, maybe in an activity analysis, and then consider that kind of top-down idea of finding out what the child wants to do and then working backwards to be able to achieve that. So the F words and ICF don't focus on the typical or normal function. It's guidance. It's not giving guidance on how something should be done. In terms of function, the F word, it is about finding a way for something to be done. So this is a highly individualized and completely unique to that individual child. This is a way. This is why child-centered approach needs to be taken and should be looked at, especially in terms of function. And we've got to remember as well that children are developing, so what is normal is constantly changing for them. So this needs to be taken into consideration when doing your assessment. Not focusing so much on the children doing something a certain way, but focusing on the process of development rather than looking at whether something is perfect or amazing on that particular day. Because it's not taking the approach of rehabilitation, which we might look at in kind of adults, of regaining function. As children are developing and changing, their function is adapting. So it's not looking to regain previous function. And also just to be mindful of any kind of external pressures or expectations of typically developing children hitting certain milestones, because generally that's parents, clinicians, kind of support workers, carers that have these kind of predetermined metrics of success in our heads, and that can also, those kind of comparisons can hinder children's developments. So the focus needs to come off of kind of ticking milestone boxes, often focusing more on meaningful occupations and being able to function and engage in what the child wants and needs to do. So the other F word that we're just going to take a little look at is friends and the idea of friendship. And we're just going to delve into that a bit deeper, why that's important, and really the benefits of why it's needed. Because it's something simple in a way that we may think of day to day of, well, we have connections with people and we probably take it for granted quite a bit. But in terms of child development, there are a lot of kind of things that we do need to be aware of. So friendship refers to a close relationship with a person that's reciprocal. Children develop friendships from an early age, and successful friendships can promote social, cognitive, communicative and emotional development. So what do friends do? They provide security and social support, support for social problem solving as well, which is something that we develop as children from seeing people have different ideas and different wants and needs, and being able to problem solve as a group and as a society. That's very important. So in terms of environmental things to be considered, friends offer a safety net and a positive influence on learning, especially in terms of school life as well. Having friends at school can develop better attitudes to learning and therefore better outcomes in terms of development. It's a better self-image of yourself as well, and it can motivate to maintain relationships and also develop actively, being able to repair conflicts and again, that idea of social problem solving. If we don't have friendships, if that's something that happens, there's an increased feeling of loneliness, there's mental health implications, a lowered self-esteem and self-image, lack of friendships with children with disabilities. There's studies that have shown that children with disabilities do have less opportunity, but also they tend to have less amounts of friends, or no friends at all. So the implications of that in terms of someone's mental health and well-being is quite profound. So it's important not to discourage young children's natural curiosities as well. So in terms of developing young minds and asking questions about differences and similarities, it should be encouraged rather than not spoke about, because that can increase stigma and increase kind of isolation and prejudice towards people with disabilities. So we need to encourage inclusion and teach empathy. So also I just wanted to signpost an article as well by an occupational therapist called Sally Lindsay from the University of Toronto, and it's around teaching kids to be allies for disability inclusion as well. So if you want to take a bit of a further look at that, it's a really good resource for some ideas of how to do that and the importance of doing that. So just to complete the presentation as well, of just how we can kind of introduce these themes in our assessment. So first of all, we need to know the child as well as possible. So the next video that we're going to go on to is going to really be centered around that, of how we can get to know a child and what we need to look at and different frameworks to do so. Just to kind of reiterate why we're assessing for that piece of equipment, what are the needs, but also what are we looking to achieve? What's the child wanting to do with that piece of equipment? What are they trying to engage with? What are they trying to participate in? Are they able to access it themselves, or do they need, what's their level of independence? And are we doing too much for that child? Are we doing too little to offer those kind of opportunities for development? So that's why it's so important for us to assess what the child can do for themselves, whilst using the least restrictive measure first, and then take a top-down approach. But also we need to realise if that is sustainable over a long period of time or throughout the full day. So a child may have the ability to hold a sitting balance, for example, for a certain amount of the day, but the rest of the day is going to completely exhaust them. So possibly they may need some additional equipment or additional accessories that's going to help that child throughout the day, but we can interchange them, or they can be flipped away, or it's adaptable throughout the day so that the child can use that piece of equipment most efficiently and effectively. Also, does that piece of equipment meet the needs of the child functionally, but also is it comfortable? And we need to look after their posture as well. And are we promoting independence with it, or are we over prescribing? We need to just kind of think about that within our assessments too. So in summary, the things that we've looked at today: the social model of disability over the medical model, how the social model looks more outwardly at the barriers and how to break those down rather than the individual being the problem, the impairment being the problem. So we also looked at the social model to look for opportunities to access the environment. I think one of the key benefits of that model is being able to kind of identify things much more easily. We've also taken a look at why postural management and adaptations can be introduced to promote independence and communication and participation. So how the equipment that we use for children is able to allow them to actually engage better. We took a look at that playground study and also the scope campaign as well of Let's Play Fair. We've seen how we can the opportunities that we can have to create more opportunities for children, and we've also taken a look at the ICF and F words framed in a social kind of model approach as well. So in the next video, we're going to take a look at a certain model of occupational therapy, of how we can look at a person and how we can understand and get to know them a bit better. So we will take a look a little bit further at that in the next video.